every single one of us, if you go out and spend enough time gambling, you will develop a problem.
Hello and welcome to Wellbeing. I'm Jack Hodgins. Today is the second and final program delving into what problem gambling is. Some sources put gambling as affecting nearly as many as 1.5 million Australian adults. We are again talking with Kate Roberts, Executive Officer of the Gambling Impact Society, New South Wales, a non-for-profit organisation run by both professionals and volunteers, with the mission of informing and increasing awareness in the community of problem gambling. It also provides a platform for those with lived experience to share their stories via their Consumer Voices community education sessions. Kate has decades of experience looking into this field and has real-life experience with other family members having problem gambling. Hello, Kate, and welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
In the last episode, Kate, we mentioned a bit about how you got involved with this kind of topic. Would you mind telling us a bit, perhaps, about how far we've come since you first came aware of problem gambling? Have we come far at all since then?
Certainly from my research with the people that I spoke to, there was a significant feeling that there is still a lot of stigma and therefore a lot of carried shame amongst people who've been affected, that it's still quite hard. There's been a lot of work, I think, done in the drug and alcohol field around reducing stigma and certainly in mental health as well. And there are lots of overlaps between those areas and gambling. But I think there's a general feeling by people who've been impacted that it's still people don't really understand, mainly because I think it isn't something you see and there's a bit of secrecy and people themselves have difficulties. When something's so normalized in the community, how is it that you can tell when, where's crossing the line in terms of something becoming a problem? And then if you can't share and talk to others about that, it's hard to gauge that yourself as well. And that's the nature of the beast, if you like. So there still is quite a bit of stigma around gambling problems. And one of the things about that is a bit about terminology, and that's not being sort of rude, but we try to move away from talking about, problem gamblers, for instance, because I often think of the analogy of the back of a jar of jam, and I wrote a whole story about this once about, you look at a bag of jam, a jar of jam, it tells you what the primary ingredient is, which is usually sugar, sometimes fruit, and then all the other things that go there. Well, if you look at someone who has a gambling problem, there are so many other aspects of them other than their gambling problem. But So it's like a health issue, just like any other health issue. And that's how we want to have that recognised in the community and talked about in the community. So our aim is about breaking down those barriers and helping people not define people by their problem, but understand the levels of problems and the differences across it. And not everyone, as I said, who has experiences the harms of gambling has actually met the clinical criteria for problem gambling, if you like. So it's pretty prevalent. About 5 million Australians are actually dealing with the impacts of gambling harms. And probably if you speak to more of them, it's like the typical pebble in the river or in the pond. The ripples are far reaching. So it is a major health issue, and it's right up there with sort of drug, alcohol, and mental health issues, and it needs to get that kind of recognition in the community. Part of the challenge that I think, and this is my personal and professional opinion, is that structurally, gambling harms are dealt with usually under the same sort of structure that has dealt with the host responsibilities and the industry's responsibilities. And that in New Zealand is a bit different, where most of the things to do with the human health issues are actually looked after by the Department of Health, and the things to do with the licensing of the product and that sort of thing are dealt with by another section of government. And I think that somehow in the past has sort of contributed. I think the department is actually doing a great job in trying to change that. But I think as a consumer, as someone who's been impacted, it probably would have helped and may even still continue to help if health was more involved. And also we need our health practitioners to be better trained in this field as well. And that's something the Gambling Impact Society has been very interested in delivering. We're not funded, unfortunately, to deliver that kind of training, but we do offer it, and we can do it, but on a user pay basis.
Which demographics would you say are most at risk of having problems with gambling?
You look at all of us, every single one of us. It's like, if you go out and spend enough time gambling, you will develop a problem. Basically, it's the way it is. It's a learnt behavior, and sure, you can unlearn it, but it'd be good if we kind of had some resilience around it to start off with. There are certain communities that may be more stressed than others. And what is interesting is when you look at areas like Southwest Sydney, where you've got, high populations of people who've come to Australia as migrants, people who might be refugees, people who might be struggling a bit financially. I'm not saying the whole of Southwest Sydney is like that, but you've got areas where you have those demographics going on. It is very interesting to see that that's where the largest number of EGMs have been put. Now, that's a conscious choice. It's not by default. And there are various venues that try to move their poker machines from, the upper echelons of Sydney into Southwest Sydney because they know that they'll make more money out of them. And so when you have communities that are being stressed by various things, including COVID, of course, as being one of the biggest stressors, it's not unusual then to find that people are looking for escape and quick ways of making money, and the illusions of poker machines in particular for that, or sports betting, which is another growth area, are there and tantalizing and are designed to get you there. And we need to develop understanding of that and create other opportunities. As I said, some of these areas, it's very hard to find social activities that aren't tied to venues that are basically gambling venues.
Can it affect the genders differently, or is there a gender that's more likely to develop the problem?
There are some studies that suggest that it's, there's higher incidence amongst men, but there are just as many studies that are saying no, it's actually across the gender spectrum, basically. Certainly when I first started into the field, they were saying that, more men than women were gambling, maybe about around the 16% sort of were women, but actually it's even Stevens now. It's really across the board. I think there are certain venues that are more attractive to some genders, like going to a club as a woman is often a bit more easier than it is to walk into a bar and a pub. Not all the time and not across all spectrums, but basically that's been the case. There are certain facilities that cater to women with childcare and community buses and things that make it easy to go. We have one of our previous speakers used to talk about the jail with pink walls, where she was placed in the childcare centre at the club whilst her mum basically spent hours in the poker machine rooms. So I think there are venues that are more popular with women than they are with men. A lot of men seem to, gamble at their local pub. And obviously there are things like venues that just got historically, like the Tab and things like that people go down socially, or that you've been associated with through friends and family. Yeah, but there's no real clear difference between people who gamble really in terms of genders.
Is it hard to ask for help when you have a gambling problem?
Yeah, I think people find it very hard to put their hand up to say, I've got a gambling problem. And people find it very hard to actually decide that they have a gambling problem. In my own case, the family member probably would have been gambling from about the age of 18 to their 30s before it got recognised as a problem. And the conversations that went on around that amongst friends is the friends recognised that this person seemed to be a bit more interested in the poker machines, or that they would stay longer afterwards, or that they'd things. And they'd all start off going down to the footy, you know, and then they all end up in the gambling room, if you like, and then this person would be there longer than the rest of them, or it wouldn't be so easy to get away, and that kind of, and that would be gone. But none of them ever had a conversation about it. So it's about being the best friend too, you know, best mate, and recognizing things. And but people aren't always. It's a tricky one, and people find it difficult themselves to know where the boundaries are. And a lot of young people, and this is where there are some studies showing that young men in particular, between the ages of 18 and 24, it's almost like a rite of passage to go down the pub and, you know, start putting on something on the horses or having a slap on the machines, that kind of stuff. And sports betting, of course, is the other area now, online sports betting in particular. There's not really much around that tells you what to look out for, you know, about when do you think it might be becoming a problem, or what would be a safer, I don't think any gambling is safe, but a safer strategies. So, for instance, people learn this stuff. I've had clients who used to recognize that the weekends were his particular difficulty. And so he used to mail on a Friday night his cash cards to himself to get them back on Monday, so that he didn't, that was when the post actually used to work. And there are people that put their credit cards in ice blocks in the fridge and things like that to slow the process down, you know, so to make, it's often access and urge management. And a lot of treatment that we do initially is about helping people manage those thoughts, the gambling thoughts that come in that are incredibly pervasive, and have a real kind of reaction on the body as well. So and it is coming to find tools to sort of put some pauses in to then develop strengths in other areas and look at alternatives, I guess. And for family members as well, their recovery is about dealing with often anxiety and coping mechanisms, and there are some coping mechanisms that are more effective than others, and just by default sometimes we get into patterns that don't work for us quite so well. And without being judgmental, it's really about giving people additional tools in their toolkit to be able to choose some alternatives as well, and look after themselves as well, and get the right support in.
You're listening to Wellbeing, where we're delving into what problem gambling is. My guest today is Kate Roberts, a clinician with decades of experience working in the problem gambling field. And when someone finally does ask for that help, what does the recovery look like?
Well, it depends what model you're working from. We, in a health model, would work from a harm minimisation approach. There are other medical disease-based models that would work from a complete abstinence model. If I said to people from the moment that they stepped over my threshold that my expectation was that they gave up immediately, that probably would mean I wouldn't see anyone. So because people are struggling and they have lots of ambivalent feelings about what gambling's benefiting them and what's detrimental to them, and it's helping them work through that and clarify what their goals are, and then how do you kind of measure that. So, you know, is recovery someone who used to be spending $800 a week or putting all their pension into a poker machine down to spending $20 a week, is that recovery? You know, so it's really working from a harm perspective about where do people want and what are their goals. And lots of people come in to treatment and they're not quite ready to say, I want to give this away. Some people are, but a lot of people, they're not sure. Mostly they're unsure about how. And most people have tried things as well along the way, and they haven't had much success. So but we try to clarify what goals are, and we re-clarify goals as we go along in terms of treatment. So it's really about working out what people's life goals are as to what would recovery look like for them. And for the majority of people, it would be about being able to walk past those machines or not take a bet if they didn't want to, and clearly give up the whole thing. But not everybody gets there in that one leap. They might need to make a few small, everything's a small step along the way. And recovery is not a linear path. I think that would be the key message. It's really like and that's why we also, if you have a lapse, and you hear I talk about lapse, not relapse, a lapse is often a learning point. It's about what did you put in place beforehand, what was missing this time, what might need to be put in place next time. And gradually people learn that experience and manage to get to a point where usually they're no longer gambling, and that's their recovery goal.
What is a healthy way to view gambling, either as an individual or as a society?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'd say in 20 years of work in this area or more now, it's very easy to label people like myself as anti-gambling. And I guess in the whole bigger picture, I don't necessarily think that gambling adds much to people's lives, and it can take a lot away. But equally, there are a lot of activities that people do that are kind of like pursuits that don't necessarily add much to their lives. And one of the things is that if you start to criticize the industry or the way the structures are, you can easily get, we like to put labels on things that we don't want to change. And there are a lot of vested interests that have done that over the years. So I think it's, gambling is something that's not going to go away. So it's really then about helping people really. I think it really is about saying, just as we have done with tobacco, we don't make people who use tobacco the scapegoats for everything that's wrong with tobacco. We provide support to people who want to change their behaviour. We provide heaps of information out there so people know what the risks are attached to it. We have changed the products so that they're not as attractive. We've limited the places in which you can actually use the product. So we've limited access. We've made regulations that have actually banned the products from particular circumstances. And we've made sure that, and we have, and it's taken 40 years if you talk to people like Professor Simon Chapman, but we've actually had quite a lot of success in bringing the rate of take-up of smoking down, and therefore the exposures down, and we've made it safer for people who to know about what, and we've also made it, it's not really cool to smoke anymore, is it really? Like, we've changed the view of smoking over. Now, that's because that's easy to measure when you've got people dying of lung cancer in hospitals, and it costs governments heaps of money. Gambling, the social costs are about $4.7 billion every year. But you can't neatly package it up and say, yeah, that's reflected in, mortality rates as we do with smoking. We have a lot of vested interests who don't want to see much change, and therefore if you don't want to see much change, you tinker at edges and nothing changes. Gradually we are, I think, moving towards more tipping points where people are saying, look, enough's enough. But I'd say we're still a long way, and most of these things have been, as it was in tobacco, incremental change. You need a society that has more understanding of the breadth of the issues, and also you need more transparency. So, for instance, we are a state in New South Wales where a lot of the information about the expenditure in particular venues and the extent of gambling is held under privacy law that basically doesn't make that available to the general public. So when we're seeing the kind of tax breaks that are there for clubs, for instance, in particular, and the illusion of the amount of money that they put back into the community, which is less than 1 or 2% goes back in cash to communities from gambling venues, clubs, for instance. We equally can't go and say, well, look, that club that I know down the road that's got, 500 machines is equally taking this amount out of the community every year. That's actually really quite hard to get get a handle on, or how they spent that money on the community and who benefited from it, etc. So some of that transparency would be helpful. And we're kind of getting things that there's a bit more pressure going on to get some of that. We need local government to step up as well. And think about, they don't have a role in licensing the same way they do with alcohol. And they tend to then flick it back to the states. And yet it's us ratepayers who are ultimately wearing the costs in the community. And local government, I think, and some local governments, like Fairfield City Council, for instance, are doing masses of work in this space, but others are just kind of turning a blind eye to it, So we need a more conscientiously informed community, really, around something that is quite hidden, really, but is very, very prevalent. We need to take a systemic approach to it, and a public health approach, and what is called a socio-material approach, which is basically that there are relationships, so many relational aspects. You can't just point a finger and say that person has to be more responsible. That's just not going to cut the mustard really anymore.
You're listening to Wellbeing, where we're delving into what problem gambling is. My guest today is Kate Roberts, a clinician with decades of experience working in the problem gambling field. What kind of supports are out there specifically for the family members or friends of those that are affected?
There is a network of government-funded gambling counselling services, which are now developing more wraparound services as well. And for instance, at the moment, we're partnering with Mission Australia, who's the Gamble Aware provider for the Illawarra and southern New South Wales area. And we're actually going to be running an online support group that's open to family members and people who are gambling themselves or have done, to learn a bit more about strategies and supports for both sides of the coin, if you like, and also to hear from people like our peer educators who have walked the talk, if you like, and can share some of their own insights. So that people can make contact with Mission Australia and Wollongong to register their interest in taking part on that. But each of those Gamble Aware providers provides treatment services as well. So there are specially trained counsellors. For instance, I used to be the specialist counsellor for the community health service in Nowra, and my colleagues used to work out of some of the Illawarra clinics. And there is 1-800-858-858 is the telephone number for the 24-hour service, which is a hotline and a referral body, and they also can do telephone counselling as well. Plus, a lot of the Gamble Aware providers will now do telehealth support as well as face-to-face, and there's an online chat room. So if you Google Gamble Aware New South Wales, or just put in Gamble Aware, you'll get through to those websites where those that information about those services are. Then, of course, there's things like us, the Gambling Impact Society, and we have quite a lot of self-help resources that we've developed, and they're online and free for both family members and for people who are gambling themselves. And opportunities to get involved with our organisation to connect as well. And if you are someone who has, we don't put an arbitrary time frame on it, but if you feel that you've come through your journey with gambling harms and would like to make a difference by sharing some of your insights, we are looking to train new people again. We're just conducting a training program next weekend, but we'll be doing it again in March, around about the 26th to the 28th. Then we run a retreat weekend basically where we train people who have had experiences of gambling harms, either family members or people who've gambled themselves, to become public speakers around this, or if public speaking is not their thing, they can be involved in other ways, writing anonymously for our newsletter, being involved in other projects. But they are integral to this kind of breaking the ice conversations that we're doing around the state, and we're delivering at the moment 80 sessions. We've been doing a lot of work with TAFE colleges, going to talk to the students. We usually do it face to face, but now, of course, we've morphed into doing online stuff as well. So there actually is quite a bit of help out there, but a lot of people don't really know about it. And the starting point for it is really that 1-800 number, 1-800-858-858, or Googling Gamble Aware, it's one word, Gamble Aware, or Gambling Impact Society in New South Wales. Yeah, so, or talk to your local GP, talk to your community nurse, But unfortunately, we do have the situation where a lot of general health and welfare services are still a bit in the dark about all of this and understanding. And what our job really is in the Gambling Impact Society with our Consumer Voices sessions is to target those frontline services, really, so that when they're seeing people who are turning up with stress disorders, anxiety, depression, worries, or whatever, we want them asking about, how do you spend your time? Has gambling ever affected your life, or someone that you're close to? And start having conversations. People won't rush to come and see me as a specialist, but they might be happy to speak to their GP, or they might be happy to talk to someone else. And we want those people to know how to respond and where to point people in the right direction as well, and walk with them a bit, because they usually are a bit of a pressure cooker waiting to tell someone, but they need these people to reach out, and that includes the whole community, really, to be understanding and feel that they have some knowledge and can kind of reduce the stigma and the shame and make it easier for people to say, hey, look, this is a health issue like any other health issue, or it's a health issue for my friend or my family. I kind of need some help with, or some advice, and we all seem to know a bit about mental health and drug and alcohol problems these days. We need that same level of community understanding around gambling harms, really.
What would be the take home from this interview you'd want people to remember the most?
Gambling harms can affect anyone. And people need to understand the breadth of that and not be fearful of having conversations about it and helping them reach out and find out information. And if you or anyone in your family you think may be affected by this, then certainly making contact with those organisations that are set up to provide, even if it's just the most basic information as a starting point, and finding someone to have a conversation about it, because the longer you sit with it, the more of a problem it's often going to become.
Well, thank you for your time today, Kate. It was a privilege to talk with you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
My guest today was Kate Roberts, a clinician with decades of experience working in the problem gambling field, an executive officer of the Gambling Impact Society. Thank you for listening. I'm Jack Hodgins, and all of us at Wellbeing wish you well.